That evening in Portland carried the scent of fallen leaves and the distant echo of an approaching autumn rain. Beneath the awning of Café Deloria, Malcolm Everett, 62 years old, CEO of an engineering conglomerate, sat alone observing the quiet stream of workers leaving their offices and the first diners passing by. On his plate, a portion of mushroom linguine sat unfinished. Like most of his recent meals, his appetite seemed to have faded, lost in the sterile rhythm of business dinners and the lingering emptiness after the passing of his wife Elaine. 2 years had gone by, and though the wound of loss had dulled into a scar, solitary meals still carried a quiet kind of cold. He glanced at his watch, a vintage Rolex Elaine had gifted him on their 25th wedding anniversary. The board meeting wasn't until the next morning, but tonight, the hotel room felt too quiet to return to early. Across the street, a young woman was walking slowly toward the cafe. She held a newborn in her arms, swaddled in a worn, hand-knitted blanket. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and her eyes scanned the outdoor tables, not searching for food, but for a faint glimmer of hope. When their eyes met, Malcolm noticed it immediately. Exhaustion, yes, but also a quiet resilience that would not bend easily. And in that very moment, a gentle question broke the silence. Not desperate, not calculated, just simply and sincerely asked, "Sir, if you're not going to finish your meal, may I have what's left?" Malcolm looked up, his eyes softening after a moment of surprise. Throughout his years in business, he'd been approached more times than he could count requests for money, familiar performances. But this time, there was nothing but raw honesty spoken with unhidden dignity. He looked closer. The girl couldn't have been more than 25, her cheeks slightly sunken, but her gaze carried a depth rarely found in someone her age. The baby in her arms stirred, letting out soft, fluttering sounds any parent would recognize. Malcolm set down his fork and pushed back his chair. "Please have a seat," he said, his voice as gentle as the evening breeze. The young woman hesitated, unsure. "I don't want to disturb your evening. You're not disturbing anything. I was just sitting alone. And this meal, it's nothing to miss." She paused a moment longer, then cautiously sat across from him. The infant lay comfortably in her arms, one tiny hand occasionally slipping out of the blanket, grasping at the air. "I'm Malcolm," he said, signaling to the waiter. "I'm Ivy," she replied softly. "And this is Mabel." He ordered another portion of pasta, some fresh bread, and a hot cup of tea. "The food here's quite good," he smiled. "A young mother like you deserves a real meal, not leftovers." Ivy looked down. Her eyes were glistening, but her voice remained steady. I wasn't trying to ask for more. I just thought if it was still good, maybe Mabel." Malcolm slowly shook his head. "I understand. But if you'll allow me tonight, let me be the one to offer you dinner." They sat there bathed in the warm glow of the cafe lights as the city softened into evening. Mabel slept quietly in her mother's arms, one small hand continuing to wave in the air as if trying to reach something invisible. Malcolm didn't speak. He simply waited with the patience of someone who had learned that some stories must not be forced, but allowed to emerge in a space of trust. Ivy finally spoke, her voice even and low, like a breeze slipping through fabric. "I came to Portland 6 months ago. Left behind everything that couldn't be called a family." She paused as if measuring her heartbeat, then continued. "The man? Mabel's father made me believe that love meant endurance. But one night, I saw her crying, shaking, and I knew I had to go." Malcolm nodded gently. No questions, no judgment. Ivy kept going as if a dam had quietly broken. I worked as a waitress in a small diner unsteady hours, childcare too expensive. 2 weeks ago, the place shut down. Since then, I've been staying at the women's shelter. But the waiting list for long-term spots is endless. All I have left is a job interview tomorrow at a downtown hotel. Housekeeping. Nothing big, but it's the first hope I've had in months. Malcolm looked at her not with pity, but with a quiet admiration. This young woman, amid all her hardship and brokenness, still held on to her dignity and that fragile belief that maybe, just maybe, another door might still open. Ivy gently fed Mabel soft pieces of bread that Malcolm had asked the waiter to warm. She did it with the kind of care that only someone who had little left could offer so completely. Soon her own plate arrived, steaming pasta and a cup of chamomile tea. Ivy hesitated, then slowly began to eat as though each bite carried both gratitude and the weight of survival. Malcolm watched her for a long while before speaking. "My daughter is your age," he said quietly. "Her name's Harper. She lives in Denver now with her 2 kids. My wife passed 2 years ago." Ivy looked up not out of curiosity but in shared silence from someone who too had lost something irreplaceable. "Back then," Malcolm continued, "Elaine and I used to sleep in the storage loft of an old bookstore. I wasn't always a CEO or someone who could afford to buy anyone dinner." Ivy fell silent. "You know," he said, "if it weren't for a man named Walter Simpson, the bookstore's owner, I don't know where I'd be. He didn't give me money. He gave me a job. And his belief." Malcolm sighed gently. "He once told me, no one truly stands up on their own. Everyone at some point has needed a hand reaching out at the right time." Ivy pressed her lips together. Mabel lay peacefully against her chest, as if sensing the quiet security now emanating from the man across the table. "And if today I can be someone's Walter—" Malcolm said, eyes steady. "Then maybe that's the best way I can honor what Elaine taught me, that opportunity should never be shut in the face of someone who's trying." The coffee had gone cold. The plate was nearly empty. But between the two of them, Malcolm and Ivy, the conversation was only beginning to touch what mattered most, trust once lost, and the fragile effort to reclaim it. Malcolm quietly reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a thin leather wallet. But instead of money, he retrieved a business card silver-edged with fine lettering and his name in the corner. He flipped it over, uncapped a pen, and wrote a short note on the back. Sliding the card across the table, he said gently, "Tomorrow before your interview, call this number. Ask for Ellen Voss. She's the director of our family assistance program at the foundation I run." Ivy hesitated. She took the card, reading the fresh ink carefully. I don't understand." "Ellen can help you with childcare," Malcolm said. "Maybe even more stable housing if you need it. And if the hotel doesn't hire you, we have partner businesses that are also hiring." Ivy stared at him, not with hope, but with the wary gaze of someone far too familiar with disappointment. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "Why would you—" Malcolm gently interrupted her, his voice calm. It wasn't the voice of a man trying to be noble. It was the voice of someone who'd once known darkness and remembered the first glimmer of light. "Because I've been on the other side of this table," he said. "I've been turned away. I had nothing except determination. Someone gave me a chance. And now it's my turn to give that chance to someone who's earned it." Ivy lowered her head. Her hands trembled slightly as she held Mabel tighter. I'll call. I promise." Malcolm smiled. No more words were needed. because sometimes trust doesn't begin with persuasion, but with a quiet action at just the right moment from someone who's fallen before and knows how to lift others up. Night had fully arrived. Street lamps stretched long reflections across the cafe's wooden tables. The last patrons were leaving. The city's hum had softened now, just the whisper of wind through coats and the occasional rumble of passing cars. Ivy stood gently, careful not to wake little Mabel still sleeping soundly in her arms. She adjusted the fraying blanket, tightened the strap of her old bag, every movement instinctively protective. "Thank you," for everything she said softly, meeting Malcolm's eyes. There were no tears, no dramatic farewells, just the sincere gratitude of a young mother long accustomed to carrying her world alone. Malcolm rose too, one hand resting lightly on the back of his chair, as if reluctant to let the peace of this moment end. "Your interview. What time is it?" he asked. 10 o'clock. At the Linford Hotel downtown, Ivy replied. Malcolm nodded slowly, the kind of nod that came not from politeness, but from decision. "The manager there. Tom Spencer is an old friend," he said. "I won't promise anything, but I'll give him a call tonight, just to make sure they see what I saw in you, a woman with character and resolve." Ivy pressed her lips together. One hand gently clenched around the business card in her coat pocket, as though holding a key she never thought she'd be given a key to something real. Malcolm didn't walk her far. He stood by the table watching as mother and child disappeared into the golden glow of Portland's night. What filled him wasn't pride, but something deeper, quieter, the quiet peace of someone who'd done the right thing. And that night alone in his quiet hotel room, Malcolm did make that call, not to pull strings, not to interfere, but to say one thing. You may be interviewing a young mother who's rebuilding her life from the ground up. Don't miss the chance to recognize that. One late afternoon in mid-April, Malcolm had just wrapped up a long meeting when his assistant walked in and placed an envelope on his desk. It bore no return address, only his name written in a soft, slightly slanted hand, the kind of handwriting shaped by rushed notes and grocery lists, but this time written with care. He opened it slowly, a folded letter, and a photo slipped onto the table, baby Mabel now sitting up, grinning wide with 2 new teeth, her eyes sparkling as if she understood how proud someone must be behind the camera. The letter read, "Dear Mr. A. Everett, I don't know where to begin. I just know I remember every second of that evening, the moment when a stranger treated me not as a burden, but as a person worthy of trust. I called Ellen. I went to the interview the next day, and I got the job. I now work full-time at the Linford Hotel. I've moved into a small apartment near a daycare. Each night after my shift, I take evening classes in nursing slowly, but it's real. Something I used to think was only for others. I still keep your card in my wallet, as a reminder that kindness isn't charity, and asking for help isn't weakness. But the greatest thing you gave me wasn't the meal or the job. It was the feeling of being seen, of knowing someone believed I was still worth something. I hope that someday when someone needs me the way I once needed you, I'll know how to reach out at the right moment too. Ivy and Mabel." Malcolm folded the letter very carefully, as if afraid to crease something fragile and precious. He placed it in the drawer beside an old photo of Elaine, the woman who once taught him everyone deserves a second chance. That day he whispered to himself, "Sometimes giving someone else a second chance is how we find our own." That night, after reading Ivy's letter, Malcolm sat by the office window for a long time. Outside, the city lights traced thin rivers of gold across the skyline like memories flickering against the dark. No one called. No meetings. No emails. Just him. And the quiet warmth blooming in his chest. He reached for the drawer, took out the letter again, and placed it next to the one thing he always kept there. An old photograph of Elaine, the woman who, even after she was gone, still whispered guidance into his heart. He thought back to Ivy's eyes that night, not the eyes of someone begging, but of someone standing on the edge of breaking, needing only one steady hand to hold. And Malcolm knew sometimes we don't need to do something grand. We just need to be the one who pauses, listens, and reaches out first. That evening, he called his daughter Harper. I was thinking about something your mom used to say, he told her, that everyone deserves a second chance. But I think if she were here, she'd add something to that. What would she add, Dad? Malcolm smiled faintly, his eyes resting on the calm of the night. She'd say that sometimes giving someone else a second chance is how we find our own. On the corner of the desk, the lamp still glowed, and in the soft breeze coming through the window, the scent of autumn lingered, carrying with it the memory of a conversation that changed 2 lives born from a single question, and an answer full of humanity.